At dusk, she made one choice that broke every pack law. She hid a wounded pup the rogues wanted erased. What she didn't know was that the pup belonged to an alpha bloodline. When the alpha found them, mercy collided with power. The forest held its breath as fate chose sides. That night, one hidden girl became impossible to ignore. The forest at dusk was her safest hour. Light faded unevenly beneath the canopy, turning paths familiar only to those who walked them daily. Caro moved through this half-light with practiced ease, collecting herbs known for calming fever and closing wounds, careful to mask her scent as she went. Patrols had increased in recent weeks, their routes unpredictable, their tempers sharpened by rumors of rogue packs pressing closer to the borders. Mercy had become a liability, and alphas enforced order with an efficiency that discouraged questions. Survival depended on knowing when to step back and when not to exist at all. Caro understood this better than most. She listened more than she spoke, noticed what others dismissed, and trusted instinct over hope. The forest had taught her that much. It was both refuge and judge, offering concealment while demanding respect. Every snapped twig, every sudden hush of birds carried meaning. That evening, the air felt different, heavy, unsettled, as if something had shifted beyond sight. Caro sensed it but did not yet understand what it asked of her. She was turning back toward the narrow trail that led home when a scent reached her, sharp and wrong against the earth. Blood, fresh and metallic, tangled with the unmistakable undertone of pack. Caro froze, pulse quickening as she weighed her options. To follow the scent meant risk. To ignore it meant survival. She had made that choice before and lived with it. This time, her feet moved before her mind decided. She found him near a fallen log, half hidden by ferns crushed beneath his small body. The wolf pup was barely conscious, caught between forms, fur-matted dark where blood soaked through. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and every instinct in Caro warned her that this was no ordinary stray. The scent clinging to him was old and powerful, marked by an alpha line she recognized even without seeing the sigils. This pup belonged to authority, to dominance, to laws that did not forgive interference. Fear settled cold in her chest. Pack law was unambiguous. A wounded pup of rank was not to be touched by those without standing. Intervention could be interpreted as theft, manipulation, or treachery. Any of those would end with her removal. Caro stood there longer than was wise, torn between what she knew and what she felt tightening inside her. The forest seemed to hold its breath with her. The pup stirred, a faint sound escaping him that was more breath than cry, but it struck something deep and buried. Caro felt the echo of a grief she had learned not to name, memories she kept sealed away because they served no purpose now. She had survived by letting go. Yet here, in the failing light, survival demanded a different kind of strength. She moved quickly once she chose. Her hands were steady as she examined the wounds, noting where the flesh had torn and where the fever already threatened. She used what she had, binding injuries with cloth torn from her own supplies, pressing herbs into place with care born of necessity rather than training. The pup did not resist. His eyes fluttered open once, unfocused but aware enough to track her presence, and something like recognition passed through them before he slipped back into darkness. Caro knew she could not stay where they were. The scent alone would draw attention, and dusk was the hour patrols favored. She lifted the pup with effort, surprised by the weight of him, and carried him deeper into the forest where an old hunter's den lay concealed beneath roots and stone. It was a place few remembered and fewer visited, abandoned long before Caro had claimed it as a last refuge in times of need. She laid the pup there gently, masking the entrance with earth and leaves, working until her hands ached and her breathing steadied. As she worked, the reality of what she had done pressed in. There would be no ignorance to hide behind if she were discovered. Saving the pup meant defying an entire structure built on obedience. Caro had never challenged the pack before. She had survived by yielding. Now, without fully understanding why, she had chosen concealment over compliance, fate over safety. The hours stretched, measured by the slow darkening of the den and the rhythm of the pup's breathing. Caro stayed with him, tending the wounds, offering water when he could swallow, anchoring him through the fever with a presence she had not known she possessed. In the quiet, emotions she had long buried began to surface, loneliness sharpened by purpose, grief softened by care. The pup's small body radiated warmth, and with it came a sense of inevitability that unsettled her more than fear. Outside, the forest shifted. Sounds carried farther, sharper. Distant howls cut through the trees, disciplined and deliberate. An alpha patrol was moving through the territory, close enough now that Caro could feel the vibration of it under her skin. She froze, every sense alert, calculating distances and escape paths that no longer felt certain. The den that had protected her so many times suddenly seemed fragile. She pressed herself closer to the pup, steadying his breathing as if that alone could keep them hidden. The forest had made its choice, whether she was ready or not. As the last light drained from the canopy and the howls drew nearer, Karo understood that nothing about her life would remain untouched by what she had done that night. The night stretched long inside the den, time losing its shape as Karo settled into a quiet vigil. The pup burned with fever, his small body trembling between stillness and restless movement, and she learned his rhythms quickly, when his breathing faltered, when his muscles tightened, when the pain sharpened and then eased. She spoke little, knowing sound carried, but her presence remained constant. It surprised her how natural it felt, as though her hands had been waiting for this work long before the moment arrived. As the hours passed, the pup began to respond to her in subtle ways. His breathing steadied when she pressed her palm to his chest. When the fever surged, his muzzle turned instinctively toward her, seeking warmth he seemed to recognize. There was awareness in him that went beyond survival. Even in sleep, his focus tracked her movements, and once, when she shifted away to reach for water, a low warning sound escaped him, weak but unmistakably possessive. The sound unsettled her more than his injuries ever had. Karo had known wolves her entire life, yet this was different. There was an intelligence behind his reactions that did not match his size or age, something alert and measuring, even through pain. It stirred an unease she tried to dismiss, telling herself exhaustion was clouding her judgment. But the scent clinging to him deepened as the night wore on, not fading as blood should, but sharpening, asserting itself. Alpha blood did not weaken easily. She thought of the laws she had learned by listening from the edges of gatherings she was never invited into. Alpha bloodlines were sacred, guarded not only by strength but by ritual and consequence. Pups born to such lines carried expectations before they ever opened their eyes. If one fell wounded, it was often considered better to let fate decide than to risk the instability that followed weakness. A spared heir could fracture a pack if rivals sensed vulnerability. Mercy, in such cases, was not kindness. It was danger. Understanding this made her choice heavier. Karo had always existed alone, defined by the absence of bonds rather than their presence. She had learned not to expect loyalty and never to offer it freely. Yet here, in this hidden place, something fierce took root. She realized with a quiet shock that she would not abandon him, regardless of consequence. The loyalty forming between them was not negotiated or earned. It simply existed, sudden and absolute. She worked carefully to protect that secret. Before dawn threatened to expose her movements, she reinforced the den, masking the entrance with fresh earth and crushed herbs that dulled scent trails. Each adjustment carried risk. If discovered, there would be no explanation that saved her. Still, she worked with patience, aware that concealment was their only shield. When patrol sounds drifted too close, she stilled the pup with a calming touch, marveling at how quickly he responded, as if he trusted her judgment more than his own instincts. Sleep came in fragments, and when it did, it brought dreams that were not entirely hers. She saw the forest from a different height, the world sharper, heavier with meaning. She felt urgency that did not belong to her, a pull toward dusk that echoed like a call unanswered. When she woke, her heart raced in time with the pups, their breaths briefly aligned before separating again. The closeness left her shaken, unsure where her thoughts ended and his began. By the second night, the fever broke. Relief washed through her, followed by something like fear, because with strength came awareness. The pup's eyes opened more often now, clear and watchful, studying her with an intensity that made her feel seen in ways she had avoided all her life. There was no confusion in his gaze. If anything, there was recognition. Karo found herself averting her eyes, unsettled by the sense that he understood more than he should. The forest outside seemed to respond to his recovery. Sounds gathered and dispersed around the den in unfamiliar patterns, and the air grew charged as dusk approached, heavier than before. Karo noticed that her own emotions shifted with the light. As evening deepened, the pull returned, stronger now, tugging at her awareness until she found herself anticipating something she could not name. The pup mirrored her restlessness, stirring as shadows lengthened, his attention drawn outward. A thought took shape that she resisted at first. This pup had not simply wandered into danger. The precision of his wounds, the absence of any pack scent nearby, the deliberate nature of his abandonment all pointed toward intent. Someone had wanted him vulnerable, unseen, perhaps dead without blood on their hands. The realization tightened her chest. If that was true, then hiding him was not just defiance, it was interference in a struggle far larger than her isolated life. As dusk settled fully, the pup shifted in his sleep. His body tensed, muscles drawing tight before releasing in a movement that was not entirely wolf. Karo reached for him instinctively, but before her hand made contact, a wave of scent burst outward, rich and commanding, flooding the den and bleeding into the forest beyond. It was unmistakable now, no longer masked by injury or fear. Alpha, The scent carried power, ancient and undeniable, and Karo felt it strike the air like a signal she could not take back. Outside, the forest answered with sudden silence. Her breath caught as she realized what had been released into the night, and how far it might travel. The secret she had fought to protect had announced itself, and whatever hunted the pup now knew exactly where to look. The forest did not ease after the scent escaped the den. It tightened instead, as if every tree and hollow had turned its attention inward. Karo felt it before she heard anything, an oppressive awareness pressing against her senses, warning her that movement had begun. Alpha patrols did not rush. They flowed, deliberate and patient, confident that nothing marked by power could remain hidden for long. She pulled the pup closer, her body angling instinctively to shield him, though she knew concealment mattered more than protection. Outside, paw steps brushed against earth and leaf, measured and controlled. These were not frantic searches. These were hunters following authority, guided by command rather than instinct. At their center moved an alpha whose reputation had reached even the edges where Karo lived, an enforcer of law who did not hesitate and did not explain. The sounds drew nearer, close enough now that Karo could distinguish individuals by the cadence of their movement. She slowed her breathing, pressing herself into the stone curve of the den, willing her fear into stillness. The herbs she had laid over the entrance dulled the air, but she knew their limits. Alpha senses cut through deception with ease, and the scent that had escaped could not be undone. The patrol passed so close she could feel the vibration of their steps through the ground. One paused, lingering just long enough to fracture her control. The pup stirred, and Karo tightened her hold, grounding him with a touch that carried more urgency than comfort. Her thoughts raced through impossible calculations, how far she could run, how long she could carry him, whether leaving the territory entirely was still an option or merely a fantasy she clung to in panic. Flight had always been her answer before. When things grew dangerous, she withdrew, faded, survived. But the idea of abandoning the pup now hollowed her chest in a way she had not expected. Leaving him would mean surrendering him to judgment, to a system that saw weakness as failure. Staying meant defiance. Either choice carried loss. As the patrol moved on, Karo's mind drifted to memories she rarely allowed to surface. There had been a time when she believed mercy could coexist with survival. That belief had cost her dearly, family bonds broken, protection withdrawn, trust turned into liability. She had learned then that kindness made one visible, and visibility invited harm. The lesson had been brutal and effective, yet here she was, repeating the same choice, fully aware of what it might cost. The pup shifted again, this time waking fully. His eyes opened and met hers, clear and steady, no trace of the confusion or fear she had expected. There was recognition there, sharp and assessing, as if he understood not only where he was but why. Karo felt a chill move through her. This was not the gaze of a helpless child. It was the gaze of something older, something aware of its place even in vulnerability. He did not pull away from her touch. Instead, he leaned into it, a silent acknowledgement that felt deliberate. In that moment, Karo understood that whatever he was, he had chosen her as much as she had chosen him. The realization carried weight. Bonds like that were not formed without consequence. Outside, the forest shifted again. The patrol slowed, their movement no longer sweeping but narrowing, tightening into a focused line that bent back toward the den. Karo's pulse quickened. She could sense the alpha now, not through sound but through presence, a pressure that bent the air, asserting itself without effort. This was authority honed by certainty, a force accustomed to obedience. Karo's thoughts scattered, then settled. Running was no longer an option. The pup's condition, the proximity of the patrol, the way the forest itself seemed to lean toward revelation, all of it pointed toward the same truth. The choice had already been made the moment she bound his wounds. Mercy had set her on a path she could not step away from. She adjusted her position, placing herself between the pup and the entrance, not in defiance but in resolve. If she was to be found, she would not be found cowering. Her life had been shaped by avoidance, but this moment demanded something else. The pup watched her closely, his gaze unwavering, and she sensed approval there, faint but unmistakable. The patrol stopped. Silence fell so abruptly it rang in her ears. Even the forest seemed to retreat, holding its breath. Karo felt the weight of attention settle on the den, precise and unyielding. The alpha had halted, his focus locking onto the hidden space as if drawn by more than scent alone. There was intelligence in that pause, a calculation that stripped away any remaining illusion of safety. Karo's chest tightened as she realized what that attention meant. This was no ordinary discovery. Whatever forces she had tangled herself with, they had led the pack's most formidable authority directly to her hiding place. Her mercy had not gone unnoticed by fate. It had summoned judgment. The alpha did not move closer. He did not speak. He simply turned his gaze toward the place where she hid, and in that stillness, Karo understood that the forest had delivered her choice to someone who would not ignore it. Dusk settled fully as the Alpha stepped into the clearing, the forest responding to his presence as if to an unspoken command. The light bent around him, shadows stretching and drawing back in subtle acknowledgement of authority. Karo felt it immediately, the instinctive pull that demanded submission, yet she did not move. Fear rose, sharp and undeniable, but beneath it something steadier held her in place. This was the moment the night had been moving toward since the pup's scent had escaped the den. The Alpha did not rush. He advanced with measured certainty, his attention fixed not on the forest but on the hidden space itself, as though concealment no longer mattered. His presence was overwhelming, not because of threat but because of control. Everything about him spoke of dominance earned and enforced, of law embodied rather than recited. Karo understood then why his name carried weight even among those who never saw him. This was not an Alpha who needed to prove anything. When his gaze found her, it cut through the remaining shadows with unsettling clarity. There was no surprise in his expression, only recognition, as if he had expected exactly this outcome. His attention shifted immediately, drawn past her to the pup, and the air seemed to tighten further. The scent of Alpha blood fled in response, no longer restrained, and Karo felt the change ripple outward like a signal completed. He knew. The Alpha sensed the pup without needing to see him fully, his awareness honing in on the unmistakable markers of lineage and power. The significance of Karo's protection registered just as quickly. This was not a Slukai encounter, not a misguided act of pity. She had intervened in something deliberate, something dangerous, and the Alpha weighed that truth in silence. Pack law demanded clarity in moments like this. A lone woman, unmarked and without standing, sheltering a wounded heir should have been an uncomplicated judgment. Punishment preserved order. Example prevented repetition. Karo felt that law hovering between them, heavy with expectation, and she prepared herself for the outcome it promised. Yet the Alpha did not act. His hesitation was subtle but unmistakable, a pause measured in breath rather than time. His gaze returned to Karo, assessing her not as an offender but as an anomaly. She stood between him and the pup, her posture tense but unyielding, fear evident yet mastered. There was no plea in her expression, no attempt to justify herself. She had chosen this path knowing exactly what it risked, and that knowledge hardened her resolve rather than weakening it. Karo felt the weight of his scrutiny settle on her, probing deeper than surface defiance. He noted how she aligned herself instinctively with the pup, how her presence steadied the volatile scent instead of amplifying it. There was resonance there, an alignment that should not have existed. Alpha blood did not respond this way to just anyone. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge that bond, quieting around them in uneasy attention. She met his gaze without lowering her eyes, her body positioned in silent refusal. If judgment came, it would come with her standing. She was prepared to die rather than surrender the pup to a fate she believed would destroy him. The certainty of that choice surprised even her, but once formed, it did not waver. The Alpha felt it. Authority recognized conviction, and instinct recognized truth. The tension between law and something older began to surface, a silent struggle playing out beneath the stillness. His role demanded enforcement. His instincts urged restraint. The pup's presence complicated everything, and Karo's involvement fractured the simplicity of command. He circled the edge of the den, never fully turning his back on either of them. With each step, the power he carried pressed against Karo's senses, testing her limits. She held fast, grounding herself in the steady rhythm of the pup's breathing. The pup watched the Alpha closely now, his awareness sharp, his demeanor controlled in a way that belied his age. Recognition passed between them, brief and charged, confirming what the Alpha already knew. This was no ordinary heir. The Alpha stopped, the forest holding its breath with him. In that pause, the unspoken conflict reached its peak. To take the pup without consequence would fracture something vital, not just in the pack but in the balance that governed it. To punish Karo outright risked severing a bond that might prove essential. Fate had been set in motion, and force alone could not redirect it without cost. Karo felt the shift before he spoke, the way the pressure in the air altered from threat to decision. Her muscles tightened, bracing for whatever command would fall. She did not look away. If this was the end, she would meet it without regret. The Alpha's judgment came not as violence but as decree. He issued a command that cut through the clearing with finality, one that acknowledged the pup's right to protection while asserting control over the chaos that followed. The pup would be spared. His survival would not be questioned. But Karo would not walk away untouched. Until full judgment could be passed, she would be bound to the Alpha's authority. Her fate would remain intertwined with his command, her actions no longer her own to decide. It was not mercy, it was containment, a solution that satisfied law without silencing instinct. Caro absorbed the words in stunned silence. Survival had come at a cost she could not yet measure. She had not been executed, but neither had she been freed. The bond she had formed in secrecy was now acknowledged by power, and with that acknowledgement came obligation. As the Alpha turned away, signaling the patrol to withdraw, the forest released a breath it had been holding since dusk. Caro remained where she was, the weight of the command settling into her bones. The pup pressed closer to her, calm in a way that felt deliberate, as though he understood the shift better than she did. What had been hidden was no longer hers alone. Power had found it, claimed it, and in doing so had claimed her as well. The den no longer felt like a place of refuge once the patrol withdrew. Silence lingered, heavier now, layered with meaning. Caro sensed that whatever protection the Alpha's command had granted was temporary, a pause rather than an end. The forest had shifted again, not toward danger but toward revelation, and she felt unequipped to face what was coming. The Alpha did not leave the territory entirely. His presence remained close, restrained but attentive, as though he were weighing every outcome before allowing it to unfold. When he returned, it was not with force or accusation but with truth, offered in fragments that carried the weight of long-buried history. The pup was not merely pack-born. He was the heir, the next in line to command, marked from birth by both power and expectation. His survival was not just personal. It was political. Rogue factions had known this long before Caro ever found him. The pack's strength rested on continuity, on the certainty that leadership would pass without fracture. Removing the heir outright would have sparked retaliation. Leaving him wounded and hidden, vulnerable but alive, created instability instead. It allowed doubt to spread, encouraged dissent, and forced the Alpha into hesitation. The attack had been precise, designed not to kill but to weaken, and the forest had been chosen as both cover and trap. Caro listened as the implications settled. The pup's abandonment had not been failure or cruelty. It had been strategy. Those who could not strike the Alpha directly had aimed for the future instead. She understood then why mercy had no place in such calculations. Weakness invited challenge. Survival demanded certainty. What unsettled her more was what came next. The Alpha spoke of a blood curse tied to the heir's line, an old magic meant to protect leadership in times of fracture. The curse bound survival to concealment, strength to sacrifice. If the heir was threatened before coming into power, his existence would blur, slipping between recognition and shadow until balance was restored. That magic had kept him alive, but it had also ensured he would be alone. Anyone who intervened would become part of the binding. Caro felt the truth of that settle into her bones. The moment she had touched the pup, the moment she had chosen to hide him rather than leave him to fate, the curse had shifted. Ancient pack magic did not account for mercy from the unmarked. It had no framework for someone like her. Instead of rejecting her involvement, it had absorbed it, weaving her presence into the protection it enforced. The Alpha struggled with this knowledge. Guilt surfaced where certainty had once ruled. He had sensed the curse but underestimated its reach, believing isolation alone would preserve his heir. Now, that miscalculation had drawn Caro into danger she had never agreed to face. Suspicion lingered as well. He questioned whether her involvement was coincidence or design, whether fate had chosen her deliberately or simply reacted to her defiance. Yet beneath that conflict, a pull formed that neither of them acknowledged aloud. The resonance between Caro and the pup mirrored something deeper, something the Alpha felt despite himself. It unsettled him more than any political threat. Authority thrived on clarity. This situation offered none. Beyond the forest, the pack shifted uneasily. Whispers traveled faster than patrols, and rival factions sensed opportunity in the uncertainty surrounding the heir. Leadership questioned decisions that had once gone unchallenged. Every delay, every unanswered question widened cracks that had long been concealed. The Alpha knew that time was no longer an ally. Stability demanded resolution, and resolution demanded risk. Caro felt that pressure keenly. The curse did not remain contained within the pup. Its presence brushed against her awareness, subtle but persistent, marking her as part of something she could not escape. She noticed changes in herself, the way the forest responded to her steps, the way her emotions aligned with the heir's condition. When he stirred, restless and unfocused, her chest tightened in response. When calm returned, relief followed as if shared. Understanding dawned slowly and then all at once. The curse did not simply protect the heir. It bound him to those who anchored his survival. By choosing mercy, Caro had offered herself as that anchor. Whether she accepted it or not no longer mattered. The magic had already claimed her. The Alpha saw it too. His gaze lingered on her longer now, assessing not her defiance but her endurance. The bond forming was not one of dominance or submission. It was something older, more dangerous, because it operated outside law. He felt responsible for what had been set in motion, yet powerless to undo it without unraveling the very protection keeping his heir alive. As night deepened, the pup's condition shifted. The earlier stability fractured, replaced by unease that rippled through the den. His breathing faltered, and the air grew tense, charged with an energy that pressed against Caro's senses. The scent of alpha blood sharpened again, threaded with something darker, something restless. The curse was reacting, tightening its hold as threats gathered beyond sight. The alpha moved to intervene, but the moment he stepped closer, the tension worsened. Authority alone could not soothe what ancient magic governed. Caro realized it then, clarity cutting through fear. The curse recognized her. It responded to her presence, her intent, her choice. Whatever bond had formed between her and the heir now functioned as balance. She knelt beside the pup, ignoring the weight of the alpha's attention, and steadied herself. When she reached out, the tension eased, not completely, but enough to restore rhythm to his breathing. The change was immediate and undeniable. The forest responded, releasing a breath that felt like reprieve. Caro looked up, meeting the alpha's gaze, and understood the truth neither of them had spoken. The curse had marked her as well, and as the heir's condition wavered again, it became clear that her presence was no longer optional. It was essential. Dusk returned with a different weight this time, pressing against the forest as if it carried an ultimatum. The heir's condition no longer wavered gently, it fractured in sharp, unpredictable surges that rippled through the den and into Caro's awareness. Each rise and fall of his breath echoed inside her chest, leaving her shaken by how deeply the connection had rooted itself. This was no longer healing that herbs or patience could manage. Something older demanded acknowledgement. The alpha watched the light fade with grave focus, his authority strained by the limits of law. He had exhausted every sanctioned option, every acceptable delay. The curse did not respond to command or lineage alone. It required balance, and that balance now centered on Caro. Accepting that truth cost him more than pride. It meant invoking a law meant to remain dormant, one designed for moments when fate overruled structure. As the forest darkened, he spoke of the ritual with measured restraint. Provisional claiming was not marriage, not conquest, not permanence in the way the pack understood those bonds. It was protection enacted through authority, a binding meant to shield the vulnerable by tying them to power. Rarely used and often contested, it carried consequences that lingered long after the danger passed. To invoke it was to admit that instinct had surpassed law. Caro understood the implications immediately. Being claimed, even provisionally, altered how the pack would see her forever. It placed her beneath the alpha's authority in ways that could not be fully undone, regardless of intention. Freedom, already fragile in her life, would narrow further. She had survived by remaining unclaimed, unremarkable, unbound. This ritual threatened to erase the last of that distance. She resisted, not with fear but clarity. She spoke of cost, of identity, of the permanence that lingered even after provisional bonds dissolved. The alpha listened, and for a moment, doubt surfaced again. Yet the air's breathing fractured once more, shallow and erratic, and the forest responded with a low, restless tension that crept along the wards. Time pressed closer, unyielding. There was no other path left that did not end in loss. The ritual was simple in form, stripped of ceremony, its power drawn from intent rather than spectacle. The alpha positioned himself at the threshold of the den, anchoring authority, while Caro remained beside the heir, grounding what little stability remained. Words older than the pack itself were spoken into the earth, binding protector, child, and power into a single alignment meant to hold against collapse. As the claiming took shape, Caro felt it before she understood it. Awareness stretched outward, brushing against the alpha's presence with startling clarity. His focus, his restraint, his conflict all pressed into her senses, not as invasion but as proximity. In return, she felt herself become visible in ways she never had before, her existence acknowledged by something vast and attentive. The bond sealed without waiting for her consent. Power surged, not violently but decisively, threading through the space between them and settling into place. The air's breathing steadied at once, the tension draining from his small body as if the curse recognized completion. Relief followed, sharp and disorienting, leaving Caro momentarily unbalanced by the sudden quiet. The forest reacted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Leaves stilled. The air shifted, warmer, denser, as if the land itself leaned closer to witness the union. The wards along the territory's edge flared briefly, responding to the recalibration of power at their center. Ancient magic acknowledged the bond, not with approval or rejection, but with acceptance. Karo struggled to orient herself within the new awareness. She could sense the Alpha now without seeing him, his presence a steady constant at the edge of her perception. It was not ownership she felt, but alignment, a tether forged by necessity rather than desire. Still, the weight of it settled heavily. This bond would shape her future whether she embraced it or not. The Alpha felt it too. The claiming altered his perspective, stripping away distance he had relied on to rule without hesitation. Karo was no longer an abstract risk or anomaly. She was part of the structure now, her well-being entangled with his authority. The realization unsettled him more than the ritual itself. For a brief moment, equilibrium held. The air slept peacefully, the curse quieted into dormancy. The forest exhaled, and Karo allowed herself to believe that stability might last long enough for her to breathe. Then the wards shuddered. The disturbance came not from within but beyond, a pressure testing boundaries that had just been reinforced. The surge of power released by the claiming had not gone unnoticed. Rogue forces, patient and watchful, felt the shift like a signal. What had been hidden was now anchored, its location defined by bond and authority. Karo sensed the backlash as a ripple of unease, a tightening along the edges of her awareness that mirrored the forest's response. The Alpha straightened, attention sharpening as he recognized the challenge forming just outside the perimeter. The ritual had stabilized the air, but it had also announced defiance to those waiting for fracture. As dusk deepened into night, the forest braced itself. The bond held, the air rested, but the calm carried an edge. Fate had chosen its alignment, and with that choice came consequence. Beyond the wards, unseen eyes turned inward, and the protection forged a dusk prepared to be tested. The forest sensed them before the first boundary gave way. Attention spread through the trees like a hell breath, warning of movement that did not belong. The rogues did not rush the territory with noise or force. They pressed inward carefully, testing the edges of the wards that had fled at dusk, drawn by the echo of power released through the ritual. What had once been hidden was now defined, and definition invited challenge. Karo felt the shift through the bond before any alarm sounded. Awareness sharpened, stretching beyond her body, brushing against the Alpha's focus as it turned outward. She did not see the rogues, but she sensed intention, fragmented, hungry, impatient. These were packs unbound by law, driven by opportunity rather than structure. They had waited for weakness, and now they believed they had found it. The Alpha responded with measured authority, directing his pack into positions that prioritized containment over confrontation. There was no panic in his command, only precision. Karo understood then that strength did not always announce itself through force. It could move quietly, shaping outcomes before conflict ever reached its peak. Through the bond, she felt his strategy forming, each decision laid with caution meant to protect the heir above all else. What surprised her was how clearly she could contribute. The bond did not grant her physical power, but it sharpened her perception, aligning her awareness with the flow of the forest. She sensed where pressure gathered, where the wards thinned under persistent testing. When she focused, that awareness translated into instinctive guidance, subtle shifts in direction that the Alpha recognized without question. Strategy passed between them without words, seamless and immediate. The rogues pressed harder as they realized resistance would not fracture easily. Their coordination faltered, disrupted by something unexpected emanating from within the territory. The air, still weak but no longer fading, stirred in response to the threat. His presence projected outward, not as aggression but as certainty. Authority rippled from him, unrefined yet potent, unsettling those who challenged it. Rogue formations hesitated, fractured by instinctive recognition of dominance they had not anticipated. Karo felt pride stir alongside awe. The heir was no longer merely surviving. He was asserting existence. The curse that had once concealed him now steadied, transforming into a signal that reinforced belonging rather than isolation. That shift disrupted the rogue's intent, sowing doubt where confidence had driven them moments before. Within the pack, perception changed. Those who had viewed Karo as a liability now watched her with renewed attention. She did not stand at the forefront, issuing commands or displaying strength in ways they understood. Instead, she remained anchored near the air, her focus unbroken, her contributions quiet but decisive. When pressure shifted along the wards, the pack responded in time. When tension spiked near vulnerable paths, defenses adjusted before breach occurred. Patterns emerged, and with them, respect. The Alpha noticed it too. Trust, once extended cautiously, deepened into reliance. He did not question her insights or their origin. The bond had proven its worth, and with it, Karo had proven herself. Courage, she realized, did not always demand confrontation. Sometimes it required remaining present, visible, and unyielding in the face of scrutiny. As the standoff stretched, the rogues adapted, pulling back from direct pressure and regrouping beyond the wards. Their withdrawal was not defeat but recalibration. Caro sensed a singular focus among them now, a presence that carried intent sharper than the rest. This was not a collective decision. It was directed. That presence stepped forward at the edge of the forest, just beyond the boundary where Ward and Wild met. The Alpha turned his attention there, tension tightening once more. Caro felt it too, a recognition that brushed against something buried deep within her. The rogue leader did not challenge the wards directly. Instead, he allowed his awareness to press inward, probing for reaction. When he spoke, his voice carried without sound, intention threading through the air rather than words. What he revealed was not threat but knowledge. He knew Caro, not her present role, but her past, the history she had erased through distance and silence. He named details she had not spoken aloud in years, fragments of loss and survival that had shaped her into someone meant to remain unnoticed. The revelation struck harder than any physical challenge could have. Caro felt the weight of old memories surge, destabilizing her focus for a moment. The bond tightened in response, the Alpha's awareness flaring as he sensed the shift. Questions pressed in, but there was no time to answer them now. The rogue leader's knowledge reframed the conflict entirely. This was not merely about the heir or the pack's future. It was personal, targeted in ways Caro had believed impossible. Her past, once irrelevant, had become leverage. She steadied herself, drawing strength from the bond rather than retreating from the exposure. Whatever the rogue leader believed he could gain from that knowledge, she would not give him control over it. The forest seemed to respond to her resolve, tension easing just enough to hold the line. Beyond the wards, the rogues withdrew further, their leader's presence lingering like a promise rather than a threat. The immediate danger receded, but the revelation remained, sharp and unresolved. Caro understood then that standing against the rogues would require more than strategy and bond. It would demand confrontation with a past she had never intended to reclaim. As the forest settled into uneasy quiet, the pack regrouped, aware that this was only a pause. Caro remained beside the heir, her courage newly visible, her role irrevocably altered. Strength, she realized, was not something she had gained overnight. It was something she had carried all along, waiting for a moment that required it. The forest carried the aftermath quietly, as though reluctant to disturb what had been preserved. The wards settled back into place, their tension easing into a watchful stillness, and the pack began to regroup in measured silence. No victory was claimed, yet no loss declared. What remained were the traces left behind, unease in the air, exhaustion etched into posture, and questions that refused to fade with the night. Caro felt the weight of it in ways that went beyond the moment. The bond hummed softly now, no longer flaring with urgency but present all the same, a steady undercurrent tying her awareness to the Alpha and the heir. The quiet allowed space for reflection, and with it came the return of memories she had long kept sealed. The rogue leader's words echoed in her mind, unlocking truths she had survived by forgetting. She began to see patterns she had once dismissed as chance. The moments when danger had passed her by without reason, the times she had slipped through conflict untouched while others had not. Survival had never been accidental. It had been shaped, guided, perhaps even protected by forces she had not understood. That realization unsettled her, not because it diminished her resilience, but because it reframed her isolation as preparation rather than neglect. The bond did not shield her from that truth. It sharpened it. Through it, she sensed the Alpha's attention linger on her with a different quality now, less guarded, more contemplative. Where he had once seen risk, he now saw balance. Her presence had not destabilized his authority as he had feared. It had anchored it. Decisions made since her involvement had carried clarity rather than fracture, and the pack had responded accordingly. The heir remained calm only when Caro was near. Others tried to tend him, to reassure him through established methods, but his focus drifted unless she returned. With her, his breathing steadied, his restless movements quieted. The bond between them deepened, no longer forged by crisis alone but by consistency. He recognized her not as protector or servant, but as constant. That role carried power the pack could not ignore. Caro accepted it without ceremony. She did not claim importance or demand acknowledgement. Healing, she realized, was not about restoration to what had been lost. It was about integration, allowing what had been broken to exist without control. She allowed the past to surface without letting it define her again. The bond helped, not by silencing pain, but by giving it context. The Alpha observed this shift with growing respect. Where suspicion had once guided his restraint, trust began to take its place. Caro did not seek influence, yet it followed her naturally. The pack adjusted around her presence, sensing stability where there had once been uncertainty. Healing spread outward, subtle but undeniable, reshaping dynamics that had long been rigid. Just as that balance began to settle, new pressure arrived. The elders came at dawn, their approach marked by ritual rather than urgency. Their presence carried weight older than the alpha's rule, authority drawn from tradition rather than command. They did not rush or accuse. They arrived with intent sharpened by concern, their focus drawn immediately to the bond that had been formed without consensus. Caro felt the shift before they spoke. The forest tightened again, not with threat but scrutiny. The elders questioned legitimacy, not out of malice but fear of precedent. Bonds formed under duress challenged structures meant to preserve order. Provisional claiming, especially involving the unmarked, unsettled long-held beliefs. The alpha stood firm, but the challenge had been issued. Healing had stabilized what had nearly fractured, yet judgment still loomed. As the elders' attention turned fully toward Caro, the bond pulsed once, steady and unyielding. The healing was real, but so was the trial it had summoned. The elders did not drag Caro into judgment with spectacle. They summoned her with formality, which was its own kind of warning. The gathering took place in the open grove where old oaks formed a natural ring, a space reserved for decisions that shaped the pack's identity. Caro stood at the edge at first, as she always had, but the bond tugged at her awareness like a quiet insistence. She stepped forward anyway, feeling eyes follow her movement with the weight of tradition. The trial was not a single accusation. It was a layered questioning disguised as concern. The elders spoke of precedent, of stability, of how easily a pack could fracture when rules were bent for one person. Provisional claiming was meant to be rare, a last defense invoked only when fate demanded it. They argued that fate did not excuse disorder. If the bond could be formed without approval, then any alpha could use it to justify personal desire. If an unmarked woman could be bound to leadership through circumstance, then the hierarchy itself became uncertain. Caro listened without flinching, but inside, tension rose. She understood the fear behind their words. She had lived outside their system long enough to recognize how fragile their certainty truly was. The pack survived because its people believed the rules were unbreakable. If those rules became flexible, then power became negotiable, and negotiation invited conflict. The alpha stood at the center of the grove, silent at first, allowing the elders to speak. His restraint unsettled them more than anger would have. Caro sensed his conflict through the bond, authority strained against responsibility, instinct pressing against expectation. Tradition had built his position, shaped his decisions, and secured his leadership. Yet the bond had become part of him now, woven into how he perceived threat, strategy, and stability. Removing it would not simply restore order. It would cut away something essential. The elders pressed harder, shifting their focus toward Caro. They asked why she had interfered, why she had hidden the heir, why she believed herself entitled to choose mercy when the pack's laws were clear. Their questions were sharp, but not cruel. They were searching for weakness, for something that proved she had acted from selfishness rather than necessity. If they could label her a threat, the solution became simple. Caro felt the pull to retreat, the old instinct to shrink back into invisibility. It had kept her alive for years. But that instinct no longer fit the shape of what she had become. She had already been seen. She had already been bound. Hiding now would only confirm every suspicion they held. She spoke without submission. She did not beg for acceptance or claim innocence. She stated what she had done and why, not as justification but as truth. She had found the heir abandoned and bleeding. She had recognized his bloodline. She had understood the risk. She had chosen mercy anyway because leaving him would have been surrender, not obedience. The pack could call that defiance if it wished, but it could not call it betrayal. Her words unsettled the grove. Some saw arrogance, others saw courage. Caro did not soften the edges to make herself easier to accept. She refused to fold herself into the shape of their comfort. Worth, she realized, was not something granted by elders. It was something claimed through action and endurance. The alpha's gaze remained fixed on her as she spoke, and through the bond she felt something shift in him. It was not sudden affection or indulgence. It was recognition. She was not asking him to save her. She was standing on her own, even within a system designed to crush someone like her. That steadiness did not weaken his leadership. It strengthened it. The pack watched in tense silence. Warriors, healers, scouts, those who had seen Caro's role during the rogue pressure, began to look at her differently. They had witnessed how the air calmed only for her, how strategy flowed more cleanly when her awareness guided the alpha's decisions. They had also seen that she did not seek praise. She simply did what was necessary. That kind of resolve inspired a shift that tradition could not fully contain. The elders sensed it too, and their concern sharpened. They warned the alpha of what this change could unleash. If he validated the bond beyond necessity, he risked undermining the very laws that kept his people united. If he rejected it, he risked destabilizing the heir and inviting the rogues back into opportunity. The choice before him was not just personal, it was structural. The Alpha finally spoke, and the grove quieted further. He acknowledged tradition without yielding to it. He confirmed the bond had not been formed out of indulgence but out of need, and that need had proven itself. He did not deny the elders' fear. He simply refused to let fear dictate the future. Leadership, he implied, was not the preservation of the past at any cost. It was the ability to adapt without breaking. Karo felt the weight of that stance settle into her chest. The bond between them was not romance in the simple sense the pack might whisper about later. It was loyalty forged through survival, trust earned through unshaken presence, and a strange, growing warmth that neither of them could dismiss anymore. It carried the shape of love not because it was gentle, but because it was chosen in the face of consequence. The elders withdrew to deliberate, leaving the grove suspended in uncertainty. The day moved slowly toward evening, the sun lowering in a way that made every shadow feel like a countdown. Karo remained near the heir, sensing his calm hold as long as she stayed close. The Alpha's presence hovered at the edge of her awareness, steady but tense, waiting. As sunset approached, the air tightened again. The pack gathered in quiet clusters, eyes flicking toward the elder's path, anticipating the decision that would define everything. Karo stood still, refusing to pace, refusing to show fear. She had survived worse than judgment. Yet as the light turned gold and the forest held its breath, she understood this verdict would not only decide her place. It would decide whether the bond that had saved the heir could exist beyond law, or whether love, quiet, fierce, and undeniable, would be forced back into shadow at the very moment it sought daylight. Sunset bled slowly into the grove, turning the air amber and sharpening every shadow into something that felt significant. The pack gathered in a wide ring, silent in the way crowds became silent only when the outcome could not be reversed. Karo stood near the center this time, not because she sought attention, but because there was nowhere else she could stand and still be honest about what she had become. The air rested close, steadier now, his breathing even, his presence no longer flickering under the curse's weight. The Alpha remained a few steps away, positioned with calm authority, yet Karo could feel the tension behind his stillness through the bond that bound them both. The elders returned at the last edge of daylight. Their faces carried the neutrality of those trained to speak for tradition even when tradition no longer fit the moment. They did not look at Karo with warmth or disdain, but with the careful attention reserved for a turning point. The oldest among them began to speak, his voice measured, the words chosen to hold the pack together even as they shifted it. The verdict did not condemn Karo. It did not erase the law that had been questioned. Instead, it acknowledged the reality everyone had been forced to face. The old structures had not prevented the heir from being targeted, and they had not stabilized him once the curse awakened. What saved him had been the bond, and what anchored the bond had been Karo's choice. The elders affirmed that provisional claiming, invoked under true threat, could not be invalidated after its necessity proved itself. They framed it as preservation rather than rebellion, as a response to fate rather than an indulgence of power. A ripple moved through the pack, subtle but deep. Relief surfaced in some, disappointment in others, but most of all there was recognition that the ground beneath them had shifted. The pack would not return to what it had been before, because what it had been before had allowed cracks to form unnoticed. The verdict did not simply settle Karo's fate. It set a new direction. The Alpha accepted it without triumph. He acknowledged the elder's authority, but he did not lower himself beneath it. His posture made it clear that leadership remained his responsibility, not theirs. Through the bond, Karo felt a steadiness in him that had not existed when this began. The uncertainty that had haunted him was not gone, but it had transformed into clarity. He had chosen adaptation over rigid tradition, and the verdict had affirmed that choice rather than punishing it. Karo felt the change more sharply than anyone. She had lived so long on the fringe that being acknowledged felt almost unreal, as if the grove itself might reject her presence once she stepped too fully into the light. Yet no one told her to move back. No one dismissed her. Even those who disapproved held their silence, restrained by the legitimacy the elders had granted. The heir stirred, eyes opening briefly, and his gaze moved not in confusion but in quiet certainty. He looked from Karo to the Alpha as if confirming alignment rather than seeking protection. In that moment, the pack saw what Karo had sensed for days. The heir was no longer slipping away. He was anchoring, present and steady. The curse that had once blurred him into concealment had begun to unravel, not through violence or sacrifice, but through unity that refused to break under pressure. The elders spoke again, this time of the curse itself. They admitted what had been whispered but not openly discussed, that blood-curse magic thrived on isolation, feeding on secrecy and distrust. It had protected the heir, yes, but it had also made him vulnerable by keeping him alone. Karo's interference had disrupted the intended pattern. The bond had forced the curse to adapt, and in adapting, it had weakened. Magic that could not isolate could not hold. The curse broke not in a dramatic snap, but in a slow release, like a knot loosening after years of strain. Karo felt that release inside her first. The constant tension at the edge of her awareness eased, leaving space that felt both relieving and frightening. She realized how much of her identity had been shaped by being braced for consequence. Without the curse pressing against her, she was left with the raw truth of what remained: loyalty chosen, belonging earned, and a bond that no longer existed only because survival required it. The forest responded as if it recognized the shift. The air warmed despite the coming night, and the grove felt less like a courtroom and more like sacred ground. Leaves rustled without wind, soft and rhythmic, as though the land itself approved of strength tempered by mercy. Karo, once invisible, stood as proof that mercy did not weaken a pack. It could redefine it. The alpha moved closer, not to claim her in front of the pack, but to stand beside her with deliberate clarity. That small gesture carried more weight than any declaration. It told the pack that Karo was not a temporary solution or tolerated exception. She was part of the future being shaped. Karo did not lean into him, but she did not step away either. She met the moment with the same quiet resolve that had carried her through the forest that first night. Belonging did not erase her past. It did not rewrite her losses. But it gave them meaning beyond survival. She understood now that destiny was not something handed down by bloodline alone. It could be chosen through action, through refusal to abandon what mattered even when fear demanded it. As the gathering dissolved, the pack dispersed with a different energy than before. There were still factions, still whispers, still those who clung to the old ways. But there was also a new undercurrent of possibility, inspired by the fact that the pack had faced threat without losing itself. It had changed without collapsing. That was transformation, not spectacle but evolution. Night deepened, and Karo remained awake longer than usual, watching the air sleep with the calm of someone no longer waiting for him to vanish. The alpha lingered nearby, his presence steady, the bond between them quieter now but not gone. It had shifted from emergency to foundation, from necessity to something with room to grow. When dawn finally broke, it came softly, pale light filtering through branches that had witnessed everything. The forest looked ordinary again, yet Karo knew it would never feel the same. She stepped outside into the cool air, breathing in a world that no longer required her to hide. Then, from far beyond the territory's edge, distant howls rose, low, deliberate, and unfamiliar. They were not the pack's voices. They carried warning and promise in equal measure, as if the forest itself was reminding him that peace was never permanent, only earned. Karo stood still, listening as the sound traveled through the waking trees, and felt the alpha's attention turn outward beside her. The air shifted behind them, steady, present, alive. Whatever came next would meet a pack altered by mercy and bound by choice. And as dawn stretched wider across the land, it became clear that their story had not ended. It had only begun. The mercy that was mistaken for weakness became the pack's greatest strength. A hidden girl changed the course of destiny. The wounded heir did not just survive, he rose again. The alpha realized that true power lies beyond the law. And the jungle bore witness. Some stories begin in the darkness, but are destined for the light. If this story pulled you in, someone you know needs to experience it too. Stories like this only grow when the right people find them. There's much more unfolding here, and this is just the beginning. Tell me, are you watching this from the US, or somewhere else in the world?